Live on Facebook, yes.
Uh-oh.
Recording, yes. It's an official act. We're live. There's no turning back.
Right. Look at that.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to our special event, Art in a Pandemic. I'm Sean Murphy. I'm the executive director of 1455. And for those of you that don't know, I'll be brief. We are a literary arts community that's building a larger literary arts community virtually at this point. Which is something that we'll get into very apropos for the topic tonight, talking about the things that we were doing that seem so analog now, in addition to trying to build a writer's center in downtown Winchester. We've got a ton of free programming like tonight's, but COVID has obliged us to try to find ways to connect with a larger and meaningful audience, and virtually is one of the ways technology has actually been a good thing, despite everything that's going on in 2020. But I'm really delighted tonight to moderate a panel with three other outstanding artists. And by way of introduction, if you weren't on the website and didn't see our little boilerplate, really the way this came about is I've been fortunate and honored to partner with Morgan Morrison and the good folks at the Barns of Rose Hill on a bunch of events over the last several years. I found in Morgan and her team willing and very able and wonderful partners. And again, hearkening back to what seems like an old-fashioned long time ago, we used to have events in person. And of course, once COVID hit, Morgan and I have not collaborated. And she reached out to me recently and said, you know, maybe we should try to do something. And I agreed immediately, but we started kicking around ideas. And it occurred to me, well, I've been doing everything virtually with 1455. Why don't we do a virtual event and include the Barnes community, the 1455 community, and the broader community? So really, it came together very quickly, and we decided it was important to try to have a conversation about art during the pandemic, to talk about what we've been experiencing throughout this year, but also what we're looking forward to doing going forward, since this doesn't seem to be ending anytime soon. So it seemed meaningful to pull in different artists from different genres so we could get a nice cross-section, because obviously what's going on in the writing community is similar and yet very different from what's going on in the film community and the visual arts community. So tonight, I think we have a wonderful cross-section of artists representing these different fields. I'm gonna introduce them and then we'll kick it off. So thanks for being here. I also wanna say, as a bit of bookkeeping, needless to say, Barns of Rose Hill is an absolutely invaluable, beautiful part of the artistic scene here in Berryville and Winchester and beyond. And it's been a challenging year because we haven't been able to support live events. So we're going to make sure that the link to the Barnes PayPal is in the comment section, so you can click on that. Please consider making a donation to help what I think we all would agree is an absolutely vital community pal and friend and source of art. This is not a fundraiser per se, but I wanted to bring 1455 to bear to do our modest part to help lift up a partner that we consider very valuable, and when we hope to be having live events again, hopefully sooner than later. Enough. Without further ado, let me start with our matron of honor of sorts, because Morgan Morrison, in addition to being a brilliant musician, is also the program director at the Barnes. Morgan has been at the Barns of Rose Hill since 2012 and became programs director in 2013. She's a member and principal manager of the popular and awesome band Furnace Mountain and performs extensively in the United States and internationally. She teaches mandolin and guitar to local students. She also has coordinated more than 200 volunteers for the annual River and Roots Festival and Watermelon Park Festival in Clark County. Morgan, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks so much for doing this, Sean. This is great.
Absolutely my pleasure and honor. Next to her, a fellow Virginian whom I've had the pleasure of knowing for decades. I won't say how long because that would hint at our age, which we're all in denial about. But Julie Miles, I am thrilled to include in this conversation. Julie is a gifted artist who brings her curatorial eye and talents to a series of exhibits, including ones that I've witnessed and enjoyed at the Barns of Rose Hill. She runs J. Miles Studios, which was founded in 1991, which is a full spectrum decorative painting atelier. Did I say that right?
Sure you did.
Her specialties include murals, wood graining, fine art painting, and gold leafing. Her work has been featured in several embassies, hotels and restaurants, private residences, and numerous publications. In short, she's awesome. Julie, thank you for being here and gracing us with your ebullient presence.
Thanks for having me. I didn't realize I was missing people till you guys showed up in my kitchen.
I know, right?
I've been like, oh, I'm fine with COVID. It's how I usually am anyway, being a studio artist, you know?
Exactly. And we'll get into that. We want to hear more about that this weird time. Okay, last and far from least, those of you that have been paying attention to 1455 programming will recognize this handsome gentleman who has been, we had an amazing collaboration with our pals at Alamo, and he did a 1455 interview with me the other month. We welcome back Blayne Weaver, the one and only. Let me tell you about Blayne. He has starred, written, and directed in the acclaimed romantic comedy 6 Month Rule. His previous films that he's written and directed include Weather Girl and Outside Sales, Manic, Cut to the Chase, and most recently Getaway, which was featured in 1455's recent collaborative event with the aforementioned Alamo Film Club. His television credits include ER, NCIS, and The Middleman. Blayne graduated from UCLA with a degree in English literature, shout out, and he currently runs the office of Secret Identity Pictures. Blayne, thank you for being here. Guys, it's truly an honor to be in such esteemed company, and I really have been looking forward to this conversation. I think the best way to kick it off is just go around the horn and, you know, in a few minutes, briefly talk about your own experiences in terms of, I think it goes without saying that in so many ways, COVID's been a disruption on society, on the way we do things. But speaking specifically about your field of expertise in art, what it did, what it has been doing, and then we'll get into what we're all trying to do to kind of rise above it. But I think it'd be very valuable to start out by everyone kind of sharing, you know, from the world you work in, what this year has been like. Why don't we start with Morgan, and we'll do it by way of introduction, and then we'll just have a free-flowing conversation.
Okay, great. My husband's bringing me beer right now, which is great.
Awesome. Good husband.
I'm going to try to sort of separate the music from the programming, which is hard to do because it's all arts. For the music part, you know, at first it was terrifying because gigs were just all canceled. We thought for just a few weeks in the beginning, which is kind of funny now, thinking that we actually thought that that would be the case. But many gigs were canceled, and Dave and I immediately started live streaming to sort of try to make up some of that income, because it's a big part of what we do and our income. And so, you know, that was the first, initially scary, and then I felt kind of guilty about how much I started enjoying it. You know, I think the creative process, like quietude, is a big part of it, and it had never been so quiet. And, you know, everything, you know, spring came in and the air was clear, and it was like we were just sitting around the house, you know, writing music. And also when there's something big happening in the world, you know, that's the big part of, you know, that can really contribute to the creative process too. So we were writing goofy songs and serious songs about the pandemic and about the state of the world and, you know, the politics. And I mean, you know, a lot of it was really conducive to the creative process, all the while having this kind of simultaneous terror, you know, as to, like, are we ever going to be able to make a living doing this again? And I think, honestly, it's been really hard sort of trying to operate like the world's semi-normal while it still happens. I miss that quietness. I mean, I'm very lucky to have a job, and I'm lucky to, you know, we did a lot of outdoor gigs, and that was really good. But yeah, there was something I liked about the beginning of it and I felt a little guilty because I knew people were suffering and it was a hard time. But yeah, so it's been a real mixed bag for sure.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Julie? And I'll tee that up by assuming, I think out of the four of us, you and I probably, speaking as a writer and not so much as a director of an arts organization, you know, I found very similar to what Morgan's talking about. For the first couple of months, I was kind of like, what's changed? Because I'm used to being alone all
Exactly.
the time. And importantly, and I say this with sincere humility, I think for all the reasons writing can be challenging because it is so solitary and you put your work out there and it might take months or years to find an audience. The doing of the work doesn't necessarily necessitate interaction. You hope for it eventually. So my empathy, as usual, but it's been augmented in 2020, has much more been for the music and visual arts where audience interaction is everything. But talk a little bit about what you experienced and what did or didn't change.
Well, it's funny, Morgan and I were discussing it earlier today because I had a little bit of like, I kind of loved this. And I know that's like, I felt a little wrong because it's so painful for so many. But, studio practice is alone, creating. It is my place of bliss and pain, but mostly bliss. And it's where I choose to be. So it was kind of great. And I thought it was good for everybody to quiet down. I enjoyed that very much. The one thing, shows are sporadic, so that wasn't so different not having those. What I've enjoyed is the way everything's virtual. Like I can go to the Louvre. I can sit right here in White Post and go to the Louvre, and get a great tour. It's not the same as getting on a plane, but I'm not stranded. And right now I have multiple commissions. I mean, it's weird. People are spending money on art and interested. I think more so being home, being quiet, being with oneself. I mean, I've had more commissions recently than really ever. So it's awesome.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. Yeah. And I don't say that with surprise so much as joy. Like that's refreshing because, I think we all have heard maybe partly because it's newsworthy, but the stories of struggle and
right
shutting down for lack of funding
but right when this happened, I was kind of getting on that role. I mean, being a creative, like when you put the work in, sometimes it comes back to you. You know what I mean? Being able to make a living on it a little bit. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Well, all right. How about Mr. Hollywood? I would imagine as a just on a basic level, and we talked about this right during our conversation with Andy at Alamo.
Yeah.
Without being disingenuous, like the act of making a movie necessarily requires people and interaction. So I know it's been at best a mixed blessing for you, but
it's been crazy. I'll say that much. But like, I feel like I'm incredibly lucky, in the way that things fell where, we were in Baltimore actually at a studio called Studio Unknown doing the sound mix for Getaway. And while we were there, I got a text message that the university that we were going to shoot this Christmas movie, which was 7 days away, had just closed. So I'm like, okay, well, that's complicated. And then by the time we got back to Winchester, Virginia, which is where we, we're doing pre-production, the whole thing was done, and, we were lucky that nobody had gotten on a plane yet, except for my DP who was, stranded in Virginia for a couple of weeks trying to, there was a time where we're like, well, maybe next week this will be over. We were mistaken. But it was, we sat for, 2-3 months. And then once that Screen Actors Guild and WGA and DGA, once they all came up with these plans on how to continue shooting, we were one of the first productions to go back in, luckily, again, the investors were willing to pay the extra money and it raised the budget by like 15% or something. It was a lot of dough for 3 times a week testing for everybody that came on set. And, people suddenly needed hotel rooms to keep isolated that they didn't need before. All these things that are just crazy expenses. And then you think about the stuff that you don't think about of like, when I have a problem on set, I call somebody who's good at fixing that problem to come in, and we couldn't do that either. Like there were no way to bring anybody into our bubble, but we got to make a movie. It was definitely a unique experience, masks and gloves and 6 feet away. And, trying to make a movie as safe as possible. But as you say, it's like the two things are so antithetical. You know, it's like us being together near each other is kind of the whole point, right? But we were able to get through that. And then the rest of post was really pretty normal. You know, I did a couple of Zoom things, but mostly I just got tested. And then I sat with one other person 12 feet away from me, which isn't that weird. And, you know, edited the movie and did the sound design and did all that stuff. So again, it's kind of like that isolated thing where I go and work with this guy who does that job. And then I come back and I work with this lady who does this job and I come back. And yeah, it was very strange. And I'm so thankful that we were able to complete it, because there was a time where I'm like, this whole thing is scrapped. Like, there's no way they're going to drop the extra money to do these testing. There's no way we're going to figure out the logistics of testing this many people that many times a week. And we were able to figure it out, which, you know, I'm proud of. You know, it's like, it certainly wasn't all me. It was like people that figured out the logistics that I was like, no, it's done. We can't do this. But yeah, we got to finish that. And then I moved to Los Angeles from Virginia, which is, you know, a weird time to do that.
You did?
Yeah, it was weird. We did a 5-day cross-country drive, you know, with a U-Haul and a friend of mine following in another car. And it was like everywhere we went was like shut down, strange. We were like driving into ghost towns all across the country.
Let's see.
But yeah, it was nuts. And then I had this movie that I wrote, American Pie Girls Rules, came out on Netflix. And in a way that was kind of cool because everybody's at home watching Netflix. So I think it spiked, you know, the numbers and the number of eyeballs, but it's weird not to have any kind of party or celebration for that. It's like, it just happened and now it's, you know, out there. You know, in movies, we like to celebrate pretty much the opening of a paper bag. We throw a party, and it's weird not to get to, you know, do the red carpet silliness. But, you know, the movie's out there and people seem to like it. But otherwise, it's been sitting here and writing, you know. As you said, Sean, it's like, you know, that doesn't change as long as there's somebody who wants a script written. My life hasn't changed much. I sit here and order pizza and write.
Right. Well, so I want to be really careful with the next question because to not sound cavalier, because there's been so much stress and turmoil and people who've been up against insurmountable odds. But what I've been inspired by this last year and what I've tried to emulate is this notion of when there is disruption or disruptions, how does one continue to do one's work with the understanding if it's possible? In some cases, it just isn't. And there's nothing but empathy and love for anyone that has just been shut down. But I'd love everyone to talk about whether it's your own or what you've seen. And I'll start with just a brief example. You know, when things started to get real in March-ish, I was beginning to actively plan 1455 Second Literary Festival, which of course, festivals, right, talk about by definition are an in-person experience. And I think if I were to give the organization credit for anything, it was kind of leaning in very quickly and realizing this has to be virtual, and then trying to find the silver lining of, if it is going to be virtual, how can we make that work? And in my case, we actually found this real desire to be inclusive meant we could bring in talent that we wouldn't otherwise be able to bring in, and we could reach an audience we wouldn't otherwise be able to reach. Morgan, I know, and what sustained me, you and Dave were doing like your concerts on the porch. So I looked at you as someone I think that was for your own sanity and need to express, but it was also a way of showing early the community or the communities, we're going to continue to create and reach an audience. Maybe talk a little bit about either that or some of the things you did as an individual artist, or, you know, as a program, you know, event planner, event director for the Barnes.
Yeah. So the live streams, we started doing those right out of the gate, and it was really for our own sanity, because as anybody knows who has a couple, all the stress and also being together all the time can be pretty taxing on a relationship. So the creative process certainly helped us, and like, you know, sharing our music with people And then, I guess a lot of people said it was bringing comfort to them, which I liked. When you're doing it yourself, you don't always feel that's what you're providing. But I would watch other people's live streams, and particularly people like couples doing it from their home. And I would be like, oh, that's so great. Like, it would give me a really great feeling. And I thought, oh, maybe this is what we're doing for other people. It's just hard to see it when you're doing it yourself. You definitely, the first couple or the first like 3 or 4, it was so awkward, just to know that you're putting yourself out there and not to feel that energy coming back to you immediately, like a live performance. And when the weather warmed up and, more signs came in on how it was okay to be outside, and we did some outdoor shows, when you first heard people clapping, it was like, it was incredible. I mean, you didn't realize how much you had missed it till you felt that. And it was really intense, almost tear jerking.
Sure.
But the workarounds they're kind of cool. Like knowing that, like for instance at the Barns, I think we're going to continue to live stream things. And like you said, we had people all over the country, different parts of the country doing live streams from the Barns page, different musicians that have played there before that were able to just, come in and do a show on Facebook, and that was pretty cool. So like Blayne said, if someone had told him what he had to do, he might have thought he had to scrap the whole film. But you find all these workarounds, and I mean, we're all creative by nature. We're in the arts, and that's really comes in handy, for what we have to do and to continue.
Absolutely. What about you, Julie? I mean, either in your own experience or what have you seen in terms of like that maybe you thought, the paradigms are changing, I'm being inspired by how these people are adjusting or not?
Well, a lot of artists have really taken the, online, as Morgan has. And so I've been taking advantage of that with artists that I'm crazy about and, sorry, I'm playing with my camera. And watching them and learning so much. I haven't done any of that because I'm not really techie like that. I'm painting, I put it out there, it leaves, it's kind of, so that for me is the same thing. But like I mentioned earlier, I love all the access I have to museums, galleries, it's all virtual now. And in addition, many of us can enter these shows now without having to ship paintings and just get, so I mean, we're adaptable. We're all just big cockroaches. I think we're doing a good job. Some of us, I mean, we're lucky. We're not in a, service industry job, we're very lucky. Yeah. So I appreciate that daily. But I haven't, Meredith said immediately, you better start teaching classes online, but, I haven't done that. Right. But great idea. I don't have time. I'm trying to have time to paint. I have a few other, irons in the fire. So I haven't slowed down much at all. It's nothing really different.
Yeah. Well, and I'll say before we go to Blayne, as a fan of yours, I will say, that's both wonderful to hear, and you're being both real but also a little modest. I think it should be noted that there is a difference between, an artist that's at a certain level of experience. You've put in the time. I think it's important to note across all genres, the artists that have cultivated an audience or have cultivated a brand, maybe it's easier or more seamless to transition, or actually that's the wrong word, right? There isn't a transition because you've already put in the time. So in your case, you've been doing this for so long that you've earned the ability to not have to start from scratch, or your world wasn't built on.
It's excellent. I'm working on this bee theme. I know you've seen it, it's kind of a nod to conservation and hello, we do need the bees, and people really, really love it. So it's been lucky. Good for me.
Blayne, what you already said, exemplifies the question, but maybe elaborate a little bit, or what have you seen like in your industry, both, the pros and cons? Have you seen some people has there been some epic fails because people have not been willing or able to adapt or be nimble?
I think, I don't really know the answer to that. I feel like like, as we've said, artists, they hit a wall and they pivot, and
Right.
I've seen a lot of that. And, I will say, to what Morgan said, I've been so enjoying my friends in bands and stuff, just live streaming. And like, there are buddies of mine who play that I have not seen, in a decade live. And I've seen them during this time, and what's funny is I haven't really thought about how difficult it must be without the audience response, which is ridiculous, because I work at Shenandoah University, and the theater and the film students have all gone online and done a really fabulous job of like transferring what they're doing onto a strange Zoom scenario. And that terrifies me. I see what they're doing and I'm like, I would be scared out of my freaking mind to be sitting here and doing a play, in my room in a costume and like talking to somebody, and like, there's technical things that you have to do on your side, but also you're in a void of like, is this working? I'm doing an accent. Can you tell I'm doing an accent? Does anybody like the accent? Or is this like the most awkward thing anyone's ever seen? But I like the bravery that I've seen from young people, trying new things and, getting out there and doing it without that thing that you were talking about of like feeling the audience and, riding that surf. I've been inspired by people. I really have, young people as well as people in my own world who just want to do readings and sit around and have this kind of, conversation, which is great. I love that we're doing things that I haven't done for a long time, even though I had the option to, like I could have gone and seen them at a bar any time that I wanted to, but now I watch them from my house because it's better than Breaking Bad.
Yep. Yep. So, for those of you that are joining us late, welcome. If you missed the introduction, I do want to reiterate that this is not a fundraiser per se, but 1455 is both happy and honored to partner with the Barnes of Rose Hill. And in the comment section, you should be able to find a link if you care to make a donation. This, like all of 1455's programming, is free. And I'm happy to continue to make it free, but I also encourage anyone that's enjoying this conversation to consider helping lift up what I think we'd all agree is just an invaluable part of our community. I personally love Barnes and love what they're able to do. And I think, we assume that we'll have some semi-normalcy in 2021 at some point, and we will be able to enjoy live events. But in the meantime, I'm certain Morgan would agree that every small donation goes a long way. So please consider, if you're enjoying this, spreading the word and making a contribution. Along those lines, and I think that what's been implied in all of these comments, and it's certainly something that I talk about all the time, I think inevitably, is this notion of community. And I think for some people that sounds a little bit too cute by half. For me, I couldn't be more serious and in earnest. This notion of what is the community? And I think the answer is, well, there's communities. There's the artistic community, but then there's, the movie community and the music community, the literary community. But I think the common denominator that we're all talking about is both being fed by and doing whatever we can to lift up our community. And I think we're seeing it. I know I've been, inspired and really kind of saved by seeing artistic types rally and help, shine light on other people's work. Talk a little bit about, how your community is thriving, or how your communities are thriving, in a different way than they were circa 2019. What do you think, Morgan? What are you seeing both locally, but also, just in terms of like, the music communities? Obviously, like what you and Dave are doing with I know that is a prototype of what musicians have been doing, but how much of that, requires kind of putting in the time and cultivating that community and making sure that that art is accessible and that community is alive. It's not just a matter of getting on Facebook and hitting record. I mean, there's some work and outreach that's really required to do that.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I mean, I think, when this first started, it was March and it was chilly out and everybody was super isolated. And I think for one thing, that isolation made people really appreciate, music. I mean, live music in particular, because they weren't getting it.
Yeah.
I was really amazed at how, when you go to a show outside and there was a live audience, how people were just like ridiculously appreciative. Like it felt great, but it was markedly different from other live performances that I had seen pre-pandemic. There were some venues like the B Chord is a local venue that built a big stage outside, and they started getting some pretty big acts coming through. So there was like this equalizing factor where like these, hometown musicians were on stage with, nationally and internationally known musicians coming through, because there wasn't many venues. And that was really cool to see that happen. And the B Chord in particular, and a lot of other outdoor venues, built these really great music communities. And it was also cool that equalizing factor at the same time, like tuning into these live streams and seeing like famous musicians playing on their couches with like their kids crawling all over them, it's like, and I don't know, that was a pretty neat thing to see too. And it, getting to see sort of these artists as people through all of this, and feeling connected to them in a way that you hadn't before. It was very real. And I think my big concern, working at the Barnes is doing okay through this, which is great. We're holding our own, but I am seeing venues close down. I mean, not to get too negative, but that's a little bit alarming, because, the individual venues is one thing, but it's systemic. I mean, these venues tore through artists, and that's how the artists and the musicians, the galleries and the venues, that's how we make our living. And, we can't put in the time to cultivate our art the way we want to if we're not making a living. So I'm a little concerned when we come out of this, will we still have the venues that it takes for us to be able to make our livings? I mean, that's a concern. But I would say that people are doing a fabulous job continuing to foster art, to support it. And that's, important to keep doing that.
For sure.
Yeah, I agree. And I think a great thing the Barnes has done is do everything virtual. I mean, we're still having art painting, visual art shows there. And they've been great of setting up a sales situation online where you can go, you can look. So you don't, of course, we're not having the openings like Blayne, we all miss the camaraderie of that, but we're still doing it. I mean, we have some amazing painters coming to the Barnes. When do those shows start, Morgan? With Melissa Foster, Bruce and Joanne Couch, Lee Henry, all like heavy hitter, amazing paintings. And, if we can't have a huge opening for them, we'll do an amazing online presence. I'm excited about that. I mean, just, the virtuality of like, you can reach out and touch everybody without touching anybody.
Yep.
No.
Yep.
So that's what I'm seeing with the painting world, and the music I love. Like, for example, tonight, 9:00 New Orleans time, there's a great show broadcasting from the Chloe Hotel. Maggie Koner, I cannot recommend it enough. Check it out.
Right on. See, I mean,
yeah. I mean, like, I wouldn't, I wouldn't be able to watch her if we weren't doing this. Great musician.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Blayne, what are you seeing? Again, I mean, and I'll editorialize and say you're proving, and again, I'm not reluctant to say the word again. You're inspiring in that the show must go on, right? Like you make it work, all of us. But yeah. What are you seeing in your community that is working, or maybe in some cases isn't working?
I mean, it's hard to. I find it hard to be optimistic about what's going on in film and television and, you know, theater for an extent right now, because it's just, it's so many, there's less work.
Yeah.
It's much more dog eat dog. Like there's a new kind of system that's happening where they'll cast 2 people for each part. One person as a backup if someone tests positive, you know, and so you can book a part and then get sick and get bumped, you know, into, you know, someone else getting it. And I'm very, very thankful that we, or the powers that be rather, have decided on safety regulations so that we can continue to work like in an LA film and, you know, television kind of way. I know that I have friends in New York who just are, I have no idea whenever I will work again, you know, and that's, you know, it's just hard, you know, it's like I don't know. Anything that they're doing to make work continue, I support and I tip my hat to, as long as everyone's, you know, being safe and acting responsibly. But, you know, it's just, it's not enough. And it's like, it's nerve-wracking of like, how long can we, you know, keep doing this? You just hope that there's going to be another shoe that drops and, you know, that changes the outlook, you know, because right now it's, people are scrambling and in the arts, as you guys know, like this is, you know, all I can say is I get very optimistic every time I see somebody who can, you know, overcome the obstacles in a responsible way. And it makes me happy and excited.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So narrowing the lens a little bit, maybe getting very personal in terms of our art. And Morgan and I had exchanged some thoughts in advance, and she kind of got this thought. So I want to give her props for this this kind of topic. But, you know, as a writer and, you know, literary nerd, I'm obsessed and endlessly fascinated by kind of the origin stories of, you know, what made, and that doesn't just extend to books, like music and movies for sure. But, you know, we're kind of living through a huge crisis. And of course, the only thing I can compare it to in our lifetimes is, you know, 9/11. And I remember as it related to literature, reading, you know, the critics were saying, it's going to take years for this to shake out before we start seeing the art come out of this. But I'm fascinated to have, you know, 3 high achieving people that I admire greatly as artists. I don't know if there's a question here so much as just a riff. Like, I'm fascinated by our opportunity to just kind of discuss either in our personal lives or what we're seeing. Like, I think we are at ground zero, no pun meant, but like we're at ground zero in terms of seeing the early release of what are people, you know, how are people responding to COVID artistically. I'm certainly seeing it in the writing world, which frankly, I think is easier, right? Because you can write a poem or an essay or a story, maybe even a novel, because you don't need that space and time. But, you know, the idea that crises inspire great art, but it usually takes decades to appreciate it. I don't know if we need those. Like, what are you guys seeing or not? Or what do you are you know, is different art being created, authentic art being created in your worlds because of this crisis? Like, is it yielding new and interesting things that you're aware of?
I don't know if it's authentic yet. I think that there's a money grab happening in, you know, the film world right now, where there's, you know, 6 million, you know, COVID-19 horror films, you know, or like COVID-19 romance, or like, you know, it's like we shot a movie over Zoom, and, you know, and I'm not against that. And I money grab might be too harsh a term, but I think that it is a capitalistic move, you know, right now. And that's funny because it's gone on for a long time now, as far as normal production would go. You know, it's like we should have a whole glut of new pictures and television, you know, reflecting this right now. And I don't watch a lot of TV, so I don't know what the TV, the hour-long dramas are dealing with. I know that Grey's Anatomy is kind of dealing with it a little bit. I read about that, but like, I think that it's going to take a second for us to figure out how to shoot a movie with everybody in masks the whole time. Not because it's not something that audiences will embrace, but we think they won't. And I think that's a funny thing with movies where you watch cinema and people are when we first went to HD, I was terrified of a movie looking like HD because I wanted it to look like cinema, like film. So we spent 3 or 4 years putting inauthentic film grain on to make it look like it's not HD, it's not video, it's cinema. And then now it's like, well, it's not really crisp enough as we like it. It's because we like the 4K, So I think we underestimate our audience a lot, and we're used to how it's always been. But I don't know. I think, I'm excited to see what happens.
Yeah. Morgan, Julie, what are you seeing or not seeing or wanting?
I'm not, which is kind of okay. I mean, I know that I will. I mean, more art-wise, I'm seeing some, political work or other crises, but we won't go there.
Right.
But, I'm a very painterly painter, and that's kind of where I live, and it's not so much a statement of current, like, crisis. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I'm really not. I don't feel. I might change my mind in a minute. I'm kind of pondering that.
Yeah.
Morgan, what about you?
Yeah, I did see something. It was like a series of shorts that were done by people that were isolated, and they were really beautiful short films. Excellent, really excellent. I have a friend, John Barry, who's a poet who wrote just a gorgeous poet about the pandemic. So I have seen some that were specifically driven by the pandemic, but I also think that, you might see great art and music come out of this that maybe isn't directed at the pandemic. It's just what happened during this time that people had this time to work on their art. So it wouldn't necessarily have to be, and like you said, I mean, there's a lot more going on in this pandemic. I mean, politically, things are pretty nuts.
There's just so many things going on.
It's so many things going on. And I think that's something that's incredibly rare, right? That you have this like Venn diagram of like all this crazy shit that's just like intermingling. And it's like not only do our news programs not know what story to focus on, but like we as people living through it don't know what to be mad about. Like I've got so many things to be mad about. There's a long list, and it just ends up with me going, ugh. But I do think that what you said is a great point of like the work that comes out of the time, spent is to me more interesting than the work reflecting this time,
Yeah. Well, you guys inadvertently or not teed up my next question, which I think is really valuable for non-artists to get some perspective on, which is, speaking of cliches, balance, like whatever, but in all seriousness, I think we would all agree. How are you all managing? We can get to politics later with a lowercase p anyway, but in terms of balance, I'll start and say, with the internet and, info overload, pre-COVID, it's always challenging to, limit our intake of politics and outrage and entertainment. To get the work done, one needs to at least try to have boundaries and set aside time to do the work or have the headspace. But I will go on record as saying, fall of 2020, very difficult to be aloof in any sense of the word. It almost felt irresponsible, even if I was able, which I'm not able to do, but even if I was able to just minimize distraction, on a human level, I kind of needed to be aware so I could engage or converse with friends. But I would love to hear everyone riff a little bit on, how 2020 has raised the stakes in terms of how do we as artists find and cultivate balance? Because I think it's never been more challenging. That's my opinion. Do you guys agree or disagree?
I agree.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it often becomes really easy to look away too and just retreat somewhere else for me. Otherwise, I'd just be an oily spot on the floor, you know. It's just also insane, you know. It's like, I don't know, but you know, time management and balance is always an issue of mine. Be it like something insane going on, or you know, something else going on. You know, I mean, working for yourself out of your home studio or in your own studio, it takes a lot of discipline. Period. Period.
You know, I said that I was teaching at the university, and when this first came down, you know, I had lots of words of wisdom, you know, for the undergrads about like, take this time, do something creative, you know, this is awesome. You can read a great book. You can, you know, and then like I went through it. I didn't write any more than I had been writing. As a matter of fact, I was writing less. I was having a hard time getting through jobs that were paying me. And here I am telling these kids, you should go and try to write, you know, the great American novel right now. It was just short-sighted on my side. But like, I really feel like that pulling of us in several different directions, it doesn't necessarily lend itself to productivity, you know,
No.
or being brave, or, you know, all the things that you need to do to make something exciting.
Yeah.
That's why I think this time is particularly hard, because we are living in a pandemic, and yet we're sort of trying to behave like things are sort of normal, like get up and go to work and, you know, go to the grocery store. And it's like, it's surreal, you know, and it's anxiety inducing for sure. And I think finding that balance is really hard right now. I found it easier when things were, again, quiet and slow and we were able to kind of process. But that's the American way, is like, go, 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 you know, don't stop, don't think, you know, just don't feel it, just keep going. And I mean, I do think for, you know, an artistic soul, which whether you're, you know, a lot of people have artistic souls, whether they're practicing the arts or not, you know, the sensitivity that comes with that for a lot of us, it's been pretty hard for sure.
I agree.
I mean, the idea of anyone creating art or going about their daily life, whatever they do, they're to me is a heroic kind of inspiring force, period. So, but I think as artists, it's tough to have that perspective and say, in my experience, you know, high achieving artists are their own harshest critics. So it's very difficult to say, hey, let me cut myself some slack. I was somewhat productive. Who could ask more of me? Like, I think we're always pushing ourselves. And this time, I mean, the wear and tear that 2020 has taken, hopefully we already have absorbed it, but I wonder if kind of some of the repercussions of that are going to continue to be felt societally, you know, going forward. I don't want to go here, but I also, when I say politics with a lowercase p, I'm not talking about our personal views, but I think what 2020 has also shown, and frankly, I think it would be, I'd be remiss to not at least try to touch on, I think what this has done for art and society, 2020 has been kind of a paradigm shift where, in my very humble opinion, 2020 raised the stakes, you know, a pandemic and an election year raised the stakes to you can't be indifferent. Again, I'm not even talking about crusading or putting your views on Facebook, but in order for us to survive, much less thrive, I think it is an obligation, but it's not necessarily a welcome one for artists to have to kind of be involved and use their creativity to inspire. I don't think we're in an era where we can responsibly retreat. And I'm not suggesting that any period of time, there's been these periods of peace where artists can just go be artists, but some times are more equal than others. And I think 2020 has been a year where artists with a sensibility for justice and peace and progress, you know, I think it's an extra burden. Do you guys have any thoughts about that? Or
It's awful.
Yeah.
It's awful. it's awful to feel like you're complicit if you don't stand up and shake the tree. I'm from Louisiana. I'm have a great deal of friends who disagree with me politically, and I feel a moral obligation, to speak out and about the things that I care about. And I have friends who also say to me, "Oh, buy your movies." It's not like, a Blayne Weaver movie is opening at the AMC in every town in America. It's like the DVDs and Blu-rays that sell are important to me in a very real way, and it really sucks to have to, put that aside and be like, that this is more important. And I feel like this year has been something of every single month there's a new thing that's like, actually this is more important than anything else that I'm doing. And as we have discussed before, like the four of us seems to be allowed to continue to make our art right now, but there are tons and tons of people who can't, and it's like I think about them an awful lot, and I get riled up. And,
yeah Julie, any thoughts?
No, I'm gonna skip that one.
Understandably, again, I'm talking about, let's remove politics as a buzzword.
I mean, yeah, no, yes, a ton, and then no.
Yeah.
What did you just say?
Well, no, I mean, just I guess I'm saying that I'm trying to be real and say I don't want to assume or imply that previous generations have had. It's just they've been able to go up on their hill and make their art and be artsy fartsy. But I'm saying that there are definitely periods of time historically where there's been crisis, and it's been kind of a moral imperative to not bury your head in the sand, even with art as an excuse. And for me, I always am reminded of Orwell, who wrote about this. I'm not talking about 1984, but his nonfiction, where he said, all things being equal, I would love to be writing a lot more, but I'm in a time of fascism and world wars. I have to use my ability to speak out. I've just always been, really humbled by that, where he's basically saying, look, if we were in a time where the world is the way it should be, I could be maybe a better artist. So I'm just curious how we're all struggling with the balance of.
I don't know, because I have a lot to say, but I'm so sick of the, Facebook and and I fall into it sometimes, and I hate it, and and I have a family that's very divided on politics, and I don't reach that in my art, and I feel a little indulgent and irresponsible about it, but it's not where I go when I go, So I don't know. Are we all moving to Georgia and becoming registered voters next week?
Right.
What do you want to do, Sean?
No. I mean, like I said, it wasn't even a question so much as I just wanted to give everyone a chance to weigh in and acknowledge.
It's a heavy time. It's like I go from kind of mania to being a little paralyzed with it, because it's like, are you kidding me? What?
Yeah.
It's every day is stunning, and I don't mean in a great way.
I think mania to paralyzed is a great
I mean, that's
phrase.
what
I relate to that very much.
Yeah.
What about you, Morgan?
Well, I was going to say that I don't know that every artist has to feel a moral obligation to sort of state how they feel necessarily, because another function of art is just beauty and entertainment and distraction. And, I think maybe there's an obligation in that sense to keep producing to ease pain, because we are in such a painful place right now. No matter what you believe or what side you're on or any of that, I think everyone's suffering, and we can all agree on that much. So art as to ease suffering, that's a function, whether you're being political or you're stating how you feel. I mean, I heard an interview with Paul Simon once, who surprisingly said that he didn't think that and I don't really agree with this, but I thought it was interesting because he's one of my favorite songwriters, that he really didn't agree that think that musicians necessarily should be political. I don't really agree with that, but I think he's a great artist. He's done a lot to open my eyes to things and, ease my pain, through his songs. So there is an obligation there, I think.
Yeah. And just to be clear, I don't have an opinion in terms of all of us artists need to put their political views in public. I was, thinking more along the lines of how are we individually dealing with a very political and heavy time and still trying to be positive and create art. And Morgan, I couldn't agree more. And frankly, I think, well, I shouldn't even say, I was going to say music, but speaking personally, painting, movies, and music are all sources of positive distraction and sustenance. So yeah, I echo that very heartily, that the mere act of creating beauty is in of itself political, because it's focusing on something that takes us away from, forces that want us to be fighting and distracted.
Exactly.
Right.
I agree with that. And I will say that I appreciate the music that I get to listen to and the art that I get to listen to that takes me away from it. I have trouble making it right now, which is why I like very much being hired to make a Christmas movie. That is like a get out of jail free card. Like, hey, make something fun and Christmassy, because when I am left to my own devices, that's not what comes out when I start writing. So.
Right on. Well, so kind of, believe it or not, we're up on the hour, but looking ahead, right? Because unfortunately, at least in the short term, we don't seem to be right in the corner immediately. I think we can all hope that some sanity prevails and, we're able to make some strides. But is it for each of you, is it kind of, more of the same and adapt as necessary? Or what do you think of when you think of 2021? Artistically and in your lives?
I'm hopeful. I'm really hopeful that that we get to a place where we can open up again, where there's a little more opportunity, for to make things and to do things, because it's like, as I said, I've been very fortunate this year, and I just don't know how long we can keep stretching this kind of thing. So I'm very hopeful. I'm optimistic. I still, I'm holding on to the idea that there'll be a back to normal kind of world, and so I'm very much looking forward to that. So knock on wood, right?
Right on.
Yeah, I'm hopeful for the same thing. I always think about, I'm a mom and I had a natural childbirth, and I always think about this thing of like with childbirth, it's like just as soon as you think you can't take another second, then the baby comes. And like I'm hoping that's this has been a horrendous year, and I really do feel like it's like there's going to be some, we're going to have things are going to get better eventually. They just will. And I think that in the meantime, we do have to continue pivoting and being creative, and in that way, that's not such a bad thing, because it takes us out of our comfort zone, and that's being out of your comfort zone is a huge part of being creative. So that's the silver lining of that, I guess. But I do have hope that we will be back to normal, and we'll be better than ever, because we will have learned so much from this time. So good on that.
Here.
I agree with Morgan and Blayne. I'm hopeful, a little bit skeptical, but I'm banking on a renaissance.
I'm actively shoving my skepticism actively.
Yeah. Right. I hear you, man. Right.
Well, I think if as artists and fans and advocates for art, if we can't be kind of bullish and optimistic, balancing that, versus delusion, who can be? So I'll throw my hat in the ring and agree with all three of you happily that I'm very optimistic. There's a lot of struggle, there are a lot of challenges, but we're learning, we're adapting, we're lifting each other up any way we can.
Yeah.
And
There's always the option of starting a cult.
that too. That too.
Going around.
Yeah.
You
You
never
don't have
know.
to be good looking or charismatic.
Yeah.
Sean, how are you doing creatively? We haven't
Yeah.
do anything. How are you? What's going on with you?
You know, thank you for. I mean, it bits and pieces. You know, I've been, interestingly, ironically, I've been busier than ever in terms of 1455. And again, I say that very fortunate. You know, virtual programming has been a boon, and I've leaned into it. So in that regard, I'm busier than ever, and all the plans are proceeding. So my day job is keeping me busier than ever. But talking about that balance, it's always important. And I find that, yeah, I mean, I'm definitely trying to talk about and respond to what I'm seeing, but I'm old enough to have a nice, I hope, a healthy cynicism of, I need to write about, this topic or that topic. Like you want to try to have an honest response creatively to what you're feeling and what you're seeing, including going back to projects that you were already working on. So I guess I'd say I'm healthy and happy. But I think also as a writer, maybe the writer's curse, you could always sleep less, you could always watch less TV and write more. So I'm always, I always feel like I could be doing better, but I will say that 2020 was not horrific in terms of output or creative energy. But I think I share with you all that for us, and I think for a broader spectrum, including those that haven't even gotten into the arena yet, maybe once we're back to some semi-normalcy, there'll just be this understandable, right? A genuine kind of exhale, and they'll be kind of got the luxury of being able to really focus on art and not worry so much, or not have to worry about safety and our loved ones and politics. Like, I think that's what we're all striving toward. It doesn't seem like that's an outlandish goal. I think that's achievable. So put me in the column of being optimistic.
It shouldn't seem outlandish at all. You're right. Like I relate so much to what you said about like sleep less, watch less TV, like being proactive for my own artistic, drive. It's been so hard, and it's never been something that I've struggled with. But it's always been, that's what I'll finish this and then I'll jump on this. And these days, man, it's hard. But you inspired me, Sean. I'm working tomorrow. I'm going to.
Yes.
Probably, almost assuredly, maybe I'm going to work.
Well, right. I mean, the best antidote to despair and apathy is being active. Again, and I think we all are
Then I get to hate myself as a writer and not just, as a regular person.
The self-loathing was pre-COVID. So in that regard,
that'll be back to normal for me. That'll be.
If anything, COVID has provided a distraction and an excuse that I'm trying to resist clinging onto. Like, how can I create? It's COVID. Like, you need to get this.
I need to be the thing I hate the most again. That's what I need. I need to refine that safe space.
Well, I think I would love to leave this conversation, which I enjoyed thoroughly, with a request, which is, why don't we agree that in 3 to 6 months we'll revisit and see where we are. We'll be in 2021. Again, I think it's safe to assume we'll be in a little bit better place societally, and we can kind of check in on each other and see what we're seeing and maybe have a better, or more clear focus on what's working and what isn't working, in our respective fields.
Yeah,
that's great.
Yeah,
I've enjoyed this very much.
I want to make sure. Did anyone have any closing thoughts, or I think we left it all on the field in terms of what we came here to talk about.
Yeah, this is great.
Yeah, thank you for including me.
Well, Julie, Morgan, Blayne, thank you for sharing your thoughts. I couldn't be happier. again, for those of you watching, or we're recording this that will be watching, I want to repeat, this is not a fundraiser, but this is an event to celebrate and appreciate Barns of Rose Hill. So I encourage you, if you've checked this out, or if you've ever been to Barnes Rose Hill, or you've enjoyed any of 1455's free programming, I'm asking you to consider going to the comments or go to the Barnes page and make a donation of any amount. Let's try to help lift a wonderful local resource that's been fighting the good fight in 2020 to continue to bring this art that sustains us. And we all will hope that all of us will, in the not distant future, will be able to appreciate each other's company and celebrate art in person. But in the meantime, we're doing whatever we can to keep the torch lit and make good things happen. So support your local artists, support the folks that are in this part of this conversation. And as the year winds down, let's all be grateful for what we have. But if you've got a little bit to give, it'll go a long way to support independent art. So thank you for being part of this conversation. Again, Julie, Morgan, Blayne, thank you for being here. It's always a pleasure. And we'll talk again in a few months.
Yeah, I love that.
Forward to it. It's nice meeting you, ladies.
Yeah, nice meeting you, Blayne. Nice seeing you all.
Yeah.
Everyone be safe, be healthy, have a great
Everybody.
Thanksgiving week, and we'll talk soon.
Thank
All
you,
right.
Sean.
Bye, guys. Good night.
All right.
Bye.